So some of the things that I need to work on here is, by the looks of things, is making this a little bit more clear what it is that we're doing in the classroom, and how to get around. So the canvas, and by the way, add to this, now we can see it moving. One of the reasons I hide things when I do things like this is I want you to share your own opinion and not be driven by somebody else. But we'll do a little bit more work with looking around canvas. I think what you need to do will become clearer over the course of today. But if anybody is unclear on what they need to do, it's really important that you reach out and email me. Also, you will have seen in the announcement, I only had one visitor this week, but on Thursday evenings my time, late Thursday afternoon your time, I'm running a drop-in session. So it's a bit like having my door open if I was on campus, and you could drop in and have a chat with me. That is a really good time for you to come and talk to me if you're unclear on what you need to do or where to find things. The other thing that you can do, and I will send it around after the meeting or after the class today, is I have a Calendly set up, so you can actually just book a 15-minute consult with me one-on-one at a time that suits you. So if I forget to do that, if I forget to send you the link, it is in Canvas somewhere, but if your problem is finding things in Canvas, I get it. I'll send that around as well so that we make sure that you've got those contacts. I'm glad lots of people are feeling comfortable with making mistakes, because that is actually where we're up to today. And I modelled comfort with making mistakes with you today by getting the time zone difference wrong, which is embarrassing. But hey, an hour early is better than an hour late, I reckon. So I'm okay with that. Motivation is hard. So this motivation number has gone down as some people have come in. Some of you will be 100% there, others would be, I suspect that there'll be quite a spread in this number here. And yeah, I think it is really hard. There's only so much I can do about that. You're the ones who are investing in your time. You're all in lockdown now like I am, and it's really important to look after your mental health. And to decide what's important to you. So think about that, think about what you can do, make sure you take breaks, make sure that you treat it like the investment it is and make the time to do it. You might find that as you settle down and do the work, you really start to enjoy it. So, any questions, concerns, anything you want to talk about with that? Is that a useful way to start? Casey?
Yeah, for the drop-in sessions on Thursday, is it the same Zoom link?
Yes, exactly the same Zoom link as we're using for this. Good question.
Cool,
so I can't remember the time off the top of my head, especially not the Vietnam time, but I will confirm that again and put it in. So, but there is, if you look in Canvas, you will see that there's a diary and it's in there. Now, my guess is that the time for our regular meeting is incorrect, because it's clearly just adjusted to Australian time, and that's why I was in at the wrong time, which it shouldn't do, but you know, privileged white people, we think we rule the world, and even our computer programs do the same. So I'm going to stop that share. Any other questions, concerns, comments, frustrations, compliments? Sorry, I've just managed to shut you all off my screen and I can't see you for a second, so I just need to get this out of the way. And then I am going to share my screen again and hope that we don't have too many problems. Okay. By the way, it's so nice to see so many of you with your screens on, because I feel like I'm in the room. One of the things that will happen is I will end up looking over here. I'll try and adjust it so it's not too bad. I will end up looking over here because that's where your faces are. So when I'm not looking at you, it's because I'm looking at you. So today, what I want to do, I actually again want to do some activities today. That's the benefit of getting us all together. One of the things that I've started to do with the content that is more theoretical and where we don't need to talk to each other so much is I'm creating, well, I'm calling them narrated slides. They're not really narrated slides, they're little videos. Some of them will have slides in it. The ones that are coming up, you will see the last two have had slides, but you will see there's quite a lot of video content in the materials anyway. Some of it is video that I've made myself, some of it are TED Talks and similar things like that. One of the ones that I really want you to watch between, if you haven't already, but between now and meeting with your group, when you get your group information, is the TED Talk from David Kelly called Touching the Snake. And I'll talk about that at the end. But if you do nothing else, I want you to watch that TED Talk. It goes for about 15 minutes and it's going to be really important to understanding creativity, understanding what it is that we need to think about when we're working in groups as creative people. The next thing I want to talk about, one of the videos I made, well, I made two little narrated slide videos for you this week. One was, what is design thinking anyway? Because bizarrely, that can be the hardest question to answer. What is this subject about? What is design thinking to start off with? And the second one is about wicked problems. So both of them refer to the terminology and the research that's been done previously. If you haven't had a chance to have a look at those, please do. But I want to talk about problems to start off with. Now, many of you will have started doing an MBA because you want to be better problem solvers. Whether that's as people who run organisations, for the organisation that you're already working for the job that you imagine in the future, for some sort of social benefit that you're looking for. But ultimately, that's what business people do, isn't it? They solve problems. So where I want to start is with falling in love with our problem. Design thinking is a methodology or approach for solving wicked problems. Complex, multi-layered, multi-stakeholder problems. Problems that are not algorithmic. Problems that do not have true or false answers, correct or incorrect answers. The kinds of problems where by doing something about the problem, you change the environment and change the nature of the problem itself. Design thinking is for solving human problems. And design thinking is as much about making sure we solve the right problem than that we get the right solution. Design thinking is not about throwing our solution and try to work out the best way to make it work. It's about making sure that we're solving the right problem. Now, the problem that we're looking at in a broad sense for the industry project is the problem to do with funding an ambulance service in Vietnam. So our industry partner is Star 9999. Many of you will have already started the process of doing some research about them and about what an ambulance service is, how ambulance services are funded around the world. You're starting to do the kinds of things that you would normally do to understand the problem and what the client is asking us for. Of course, you're a little bit stumped at the moment because we haven't even met the client yet. We don't really know beyond this sort of broad theme, ambulances in Vietnam. And in particular, how can we make sure that the company who runs ambulances has enough money to keep them running? So at the moment, we just have a problem theme. What I want you to do is fall in love with that problem. So one of the things I would normally do in a classroom, I've just realised, sorry, I got myself distracted by looking at you or looking at all of you, because right in the middle of it is my husband, because I'm using his computer. And so the one that says Kath's second screen is a picture of my husband, who also works at RMIT, with the cheesiest grin on his face. So I feel like he's looking at me and laughing at me. So I might just need to hide him, by the way. So sorry, I got distracted myself. I was talking about falling in love. So do that for a second. In a classroom, this is what I would ask you to do. I would ask you to close your eyes for a second. And I would ask you to think about falling in love. The first time you fell in love, the last time you fell in love. Now, normally, if we weren't all in lockdown, for some of you, the last time you fell in love might have been this morning when you got on a bus or drove past the place where you get coffee. You know, some of us fall in love every day. Others, it might have been the first time you fell in love. You might have been on a playground or at primary school. Remember when you first found that special person. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about love that lasts. I'm not talking about getting married. Getting married is a solution. For some of you, it might not be the partner that you fell in love with. It might be the first time you met your baby brother or your own child. Think about what it felt like when you were first 100% giddily, head over heels in love with that person. Remember how everything about that person was interesting. You actually cared what TV shows they liked, or what toothpaste they use. Remember how when you're absolutely 100% in love with somebody the first time and you find out that they didn't like a movie that you loved, like it actually hurts you a little bit. You actually genuinely care when you first fall in love with somebody, what your parents think, what your friends think. You ask everybody about what they think of this other person. If the person who we're talking about that you're in love with, you're thinking about, was your newborn baby, you can't imagine that there's anything wrong. You know, you will do every test you need to do, but you can't imagine that your baby isn't just the best baby in the whole wide world. Have you got that feeling? Got that feeling of how important it is? So think about it, like with a baby. Because you're in love with that baby, you've got all of these wants and desires for them. You want them to have a happy life, perhaps to get a good education. I know for me, I've got 2 children, they're both adults now. One of the things that was really important to me was that they got a really good education, that they had opportunities that I might have missed out on when I was a kid, that it was easier for them to get access to going to university and things like that, because I love them. But that is different from deciding I want them to be a lawyer, or I want them to be an engineer, or I want them to run the family business. Because I love them, I'm interested in them as opposed to the solution. Now, no, not every parent will be the same, but then I'm much more interested in the person that I love than I am in the solution. This is how I want you to feel about your problem. You are going to try and fall in love with your problem. And because you're falling in love with your problem, you are not going to rush to the first solution. You love your problem, so the first solution will not necessarily be the best solution for them. You're not going to marry them off to the first solution that comes along. You are going to make sure that this problem gets absolutely all of the attention that it deserves, and you are going to explore it with the same kind of curiosity, the same kind of interest and deep respect that you would with a new lover. You will watch it sleep. You will be interested in anybody else's opinion about it. Now, at the end of the day, this might not be the problem for you. This problem, it's an assignment task after all. This might be just a little fling that you're going to have while you're doing this subject. And there'll be other problems that come along in the future that you will have a lifelong attachment and love for. You might have found the problem that really, really floats your boat already, and you might be feeling a little bit guilty taking time away from that problem to spend time on this one. But at risk of drawing the analogy too far, this is what design thinkers do. Rather than go straight to what the solution is, we really, really deeply understand the problem. The other thing, just as a side note, that I've just done is I've used a design thinking tool that you will use a lot over this process. Even though you've only seen one little picture on that screen, I have been using what we call visualization. So visualization is something that design thinkers use a lot. We use it to better understand, but we also use it to explain and to create ideas. Now, I don't know whether that analogy worked for you or not, but can you see that by me telling a story, by me trying to empathize with you, and by me encouraging you to draw on your own feelings, that you have a better sense of what it is that I am trying to get you to do. Think back to the exercise that we did last week when you were creating something to solve a problem for the person you were partnered with. Now, we had to cut that short because I went for too long. That happens a bit. But also, it was very difficult without you being in the same room to really get to the next step. And the very final step involves you to talk through with your problem. I keep saying with your problem, but in that case, the problem was the person you were designing for. Talk through with your partner what your solution might have worked with and to get them to imagine using it. That's visualization, and we come back to it a lot. Now, please interrupt as we go with questions, comments, anything you want to say. I've lost my chat screen, so I can't see it at the moment. One of the best ways to do that is to wave your hand around, okay? Or a bit of colour, if you want to talk to me. So, working through, what I want us to start doing is to think about our problem. And in order to think about our problem, I don't want you to think about the solution, but I want you to start with the end in mind. One of the things that we need to do to really understand our problem is to have a reasonably clear picture about what things would be true if the problem went away, if the problem was solved. Now, the picture I have behind there is from one of my favourite movies. It's a bit old now. A movie called Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks in it. Don't know if any of you have seen it. It's a little bit old. Seeing some nodding faces. If you haven't seen it, it's a terrific movie, and many of you will have a lot of spare time to watch movies at the moment. One of the reasons it's so terrific is that it's an absolutely true story. It's a story about when the 13th Apollo mission took off. They had a problem on takeoff, and as a consequence, they didn't know how they were going to get back. And most of the movie is about problem solving. I love the way Nam is changing his backgrounds. I think you should all keep playing with things like that. I want to see as many different backgrounds as I possibly can. So, you may as well, if you're going to do extra things, you may as well do them in the room and make us all laugh, right? So this is from a scene where the guy, the head at Mission Control, Gene, somebody can't remember his name, is basically explaining the problem to the room. And it's actually as simple as this. Where are we now? We've got a spacecraft up in space, basically. We've only got so much fuel, and we don't know how much damage there is. This is where the Earth is, and we need to get our spaceship, from here to here. So he's really clear on what solved looks like. But having something solved is different from knowing what the solution is. So we're going to, one of the things that you're going to need to do, and one of the first things that you're going to need to do with your group, is get a common picture as to what solved will look like for your industry problem. Now, it may well be that you still need to do a little bit of work about understanding the problem before you know for sure. And it might be that you're going to iterate and keep coming back to that. But where we start is with this simple question. Why are we doing this project? Where do we want to be in 6 months, a year, or 5 years from now? Now, for you as individuals, why you're doing this project is because I'm making you do it in order to get a grade. I get that, okay? I completely understand that. And in your groups, that's probably a good conversation for you to have too, because there will be some of you who a high distinction is, not negotiable. That's what you want to do. And there will be other people who live by the mantra, P's get degrees. Passes is enough. I don't care. There will be other people who will be somewhere and it's like, the mark isn't as important to me as what I learn or what I take away from this. Those conversations in any group work project are going to be really important to have so you can work out where you're going. And we'll do some work around I'll do some work with you today to help you navigate that first conversation. Oh, sorry. What I was going to say before that is in relation to our problem, at the moment we're just talking about ambulance services in Vietnam and how we're going to fund them. So actually just at the moment, putting some big goals, don't worry at the moment, and this will be the next slide, about how you're going to do it or whether the technology exists or what the problems are in getting there. Don't censor just what would solve look like. What would a good solution look like in 6 months' time? What would a good solution look like? What features would it have in a year's time or 5 years' time? So you might start with a big, hairy 5 years. In 5 years' time, every Vietnamese citizen, regardless of their economic status, will get the right ambulance very quickly within minutes of it being called. It's a big goal. Whether it's feasible, what the problems are, any of that stuff, we don't know at this stage, right? But it's a good goal. Settling on those things is really important. Now, in the video that I made earlier about what design thinking is in the materials, the narrated slide section now in Canvas, I spoke a little bit about these 3 questions that are really important. Firstly, design thinkers are always looking, when finding a solution, as to whether it is a desirable solution. Do the people that we are building this solution for, do the people who are suffering the problem that we're in love with, do they want this? Do they need it? Will they use it? The second question is it feasible? Can we do it? Do we have the technology? Do we have the resources? One of the, you might come up ultimately with a solution for ambulances, which is we'll just teleport people to hospital. Traffic's bad, so we'll just go all Star Trek and teleport people. Well, clearly that initially at least, we don't have the technology that allows us to do that. So that is not a feasible solution. And secondly, this idea of a viable solution. Is it viable? So viable is often as simple as, can we make this solution for less money than we will sell it for? So is it profitable? Is it financially viable? But also ethical people, ethical companies will also ask, is it the right thing? Is it sustainable? Is this a short-term or a long-term solution? Is it consistent with the company's goals, with the company's values? Is it consistent with the methodology that we have? So, for example, you might come up with a crazy solution. And by the way, when I say crazy, I mean that in a good way, for reasons you'll understand. You might just decide that half of the roads in Vietnam, in any major city, should be blocked from any traffic at all other than ambulances, so the ambulances can move super fast if they need to. Okay, great solutions for moving ambulances around quickly, but that is not a sustainable solution, is it? It is not a viable solution economically, politically, culturally, driving around Saigon. But at this early stage, so you are definitely going to judge your solutions by reference to whether they're feasible and viable. But early on, when we first start to create solutions, I actually want you to forget about feasibility and viability. Because feasibility and viability will limit your imaginations. And what we will find is at the first part, we need to use what we call divergent thinking. We need to branch out. And you are going to come up with as many desirable outcomes as you possibly can before we winnow back in by using convergent thinking to find the ones that are viable and feasible. Now, the reason for this is statistically, the only way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. The best idea always has a better and a good idea sitting behind it. Good, better, best. It's like you can only have a best friend if you have at least two other friends, one good one better one, and then you've got a best friend. But realistically, and I will share some statistical information with you, but it is quite clear that the most successful entrepreneurs, the most successful innovators test many ideas and winnow down to the best. And it's only because they have ideas that are not limited by available technology or available resources that they are able to get something completely different. Imagine if the guys who started Airbnb had said, well, there's no point in really pursuing this because we've only got one room to rent. In order to actually achieve the success that Airbnb has, we need to have hundreds of rooms. Well, it turns out that they have hundreds of millions of rooms now. But if they had started by limiting themselves, they wouldn't have expanded the ideas. So the next part I want to talk about is creativity, but I want to talk about creativity in the context of teams. Now, this is because from pretty much this afternoon, you're going to be allocated to a team and you're going to have to start working with other people in a team. The book that I've got in front of you, unfortunately, is not available in RMIT's library in soft copy. And it's not that easy to get, so I don't expect you to read it. But I have included in the materials some resources from this particular professor, Lee Thompson. She actually taught me at Kellogg, Northwestern University at Kellogg Business School, and she's very inspiring and she has some really interesting ideas that are really consistent with what we're doing here. And I've used these ideas in building the teams that work for me for many years, and I think that they're going to really help you think about the way that you build your own team of peers for this assignment. So in order to think about what we need to think about for building teams, I want to talk about the things that can go wrong with teams. Just a quick sort of show of hands. Actually, I can probably do it as a quick poll. No, I can't do it quickly. There's a poll. Just as a show of hands, who loves teamwork? Yeah, no, but there's a couple. It's when you see each other's poll. Whatever. I've got Anne, you've noticed a little clapping piece. Great. People who love teamwork will love doing their MBA because you have to work in teams all the time. I love teamwork too. I must admit, when I was at university, working in teams was not my favourite part of doing my MBA. And I often hear from my students, I might have said this to you last week, one of the best things, when I ask people who are graduating about their MBA, what was the best thing about your MBA? Usually they say the people, the other students, the people I work with. And when I ask them what was the worst thing, they say the people having to do group work. And so they're not inconsistent statements, really. We can have different ideas about what it is that we want to achieve, but also MBA group work teams are different from teamwork in organisations. We try and make them as similar as we can, but they're different, right? When you're put into a team in an organisation, if it's done properly, everybody in the team brings a different set of skills, right? So usually if I'm part of a team, I'm usually there as the lawyer. There'll usually be a technical person. There'll often be a marketing person. So we're considering a new product. I'll be responsible for the legal and the compliance aspects, probably for the agreements with the other side. Or the customers or the suppliers or whoever we're dealing with. The marketing people will be thinking about product marketing fit. There'll be an accounting person and a finance person who are working out how we're going to fund it. Everybody's bringing in something different. Also, most teams usually have a boss, all right? So there's somebody who can make that decision. In a really good, healthy team, everybody has a say, but ultimately, once a decision's made, everybody's had their say, you walk out of the room and you're 100% behind whatever that decision was, even if it's exactly the opposite of what you would have chosen. That can be a lot harder to do in a team of peers, in a team of equals, because ultimately you're all trying to learn. So I only mention this not to put you off, but to recognise it, because I think it's important that we recognise these things. So there are a few behavioural blockers that can really impact the way that teams work. And this comes from Lee Thompson's work. Click here, what's going on? So one of them is going with the crowd. You noticed earlier, and when I had the Menti up, and for any of you who haven't done that, if you've got a second, do go to menti.com and click the number for it is 759725. Answer a couple of questions there. When I first had that on, I tried to hide the answers. And one of the reasons for that is I don't want your answer to influence you. Because we do tend to go with the crowd. One of the ways that humans have evolved, one of the reasons that humans have continued to survive on this planet is because we naturally want to fit into a group. Groups tend to work better for survival on average than individuals going it alone. Being in a group, we can make some people hunters and some people gatherers. One of the reasons so many people are finding this current situation so difficult is because we are used to socializing and being part of a group. And one of the ways that plays out is groupthink. We tend to want to agree with other people around us. And that's great. It makes it a much more pleasant situation, but it can result in all sorts of difficulties. Nam just walked off the planet. Oh, he's back again. Sorry, that was quite amusing. You literally walked off the planet. Very cute. So that can, whilst it can make being in the group more pleasant when people don't disagree with each other, it can actually, too much going with the crowd can significantly impact the ability of the group to function well. The next one, economists call it the free rider effect, riding the bus without paying the fare. So this is the tendency for people not to work as hard when they're in a group as they would have if they were individually accountable for the work. And I think all of us have been there, had somebody in the group who isn't pulling their weight. Another one is, it's really interesting, it's called the team superiority complex. When we identify as part of a team, we naturally think that our team or our group is better than the other teams or groups. Any of you support a football team? Yeah? Do you want to just unmute yourselves for a second? Nam, what's your football team?
I support Liverpool.
Liverpool.
In England.
In
Yeah.
England? Got any other Liverpool supporters here? No? So already you've decided that your team is better than NAM's, right? What about you, Jason? What's your team? I might need to unmute you, sorry. What is it, Jason?
I don't have one.
You don't have one.
Yep,
Okay, so
no.
you're identifying as a person who doesn't like football. What about you, Casey?
Tottenham Spurs.
Tottenham Spurs. So can you see how one of the things that we do, we like the uniform. We like to identify as being a member of a particular supporting group or a thing that we love to do. Does anybody else here like to go hiking? Anybody who likes hiking? Okay, so this whole, I can see you as a top row, and Jason as well. I can't see enough for those of you who don't have the thing. Already, those of us who like hiking, we've already created a kind of like a little group. I'm thinking, okay, next time I go to Vietnam, I need to reach out to Casey, Phil, Ken, Jason, because I love to go hiking and I'm always looking for new spots, right? That's part, because I think people who like hiking are clearly better than people who just like to sit around doing nothing. Now that's clearly not true, not better or worse, but this is actually how humans work. We identify as part of a group, and we do tend to think that our group that likes doing something, well, we're clearly onto something that the groups who don't do that or don't support in the same way are not. The next one is referred to as the tyranny of the average. Now this sometimes is controversial. Often we think that when a team is struggling, if we put a good person into that team, somebody who's a bit cleverer or who's had an experience before, that person will be able to lift the team up. We see this in business all the time. Companies are struggling, let's put in a new CEO. What actually tends to happen, and the research shows, is that teams tend to actually move down towards the person at the bottom rather than get lifted up by the person at the top, unless they are very specifically clear about what they're trying to do, and that the person who is there to lift them up has not only the responsibility to do that, but the authority to follow through. So I'll talk about that in a second. Another one, now this is Lee Thompson's word, cognitus interruptus. Now cognitus interruptus you've seen happen here over and over again. There is a lot of research, neuroscience research, that shows us that the myth that women multitask better than men is completely false. Nobody is good at multitasking. In theory, our enormous brains, and we tend to do this, can do a lot of things at one time. I'm trying to do a lot of things right now. I am trying to make sure that I remember all of the content that I need to share with you. I'm looking at pictures of you to see whether or not it looks like you're paying attention, whether I'm making any sense. I'm looking at my notes are sort of over there. I've got a screen over here which represents what I think you can see. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking about how I have to make the recordings, and occasionally I'm being distracted by backgrounds or taking notes to remember something. That is, I'm multitasking. But what's actually happening is my brain is just making micro decisions. I am stopping, starting all the time. Now, I'm trying very hard not to do that, and 100% of my attention is actually on doing what I need to do to share these insights with you. But all of us try and multitask, and for all of us it is a difficult thing to do. And there's some research that shows that if you have 10 things to do in a day, you are better off getting them done one at a time than if you try and do all of them at once. You know, even if they look like things that you can do at the same time. And that the work that you do and the time it would take is considerably reduced if you have the luxury of doing one thing at a time. Now, at the moment, with you all locked in your houses, that's going to be relatively easy. But think about what it's like when you're in a busy cafe or in a work environment and you're working on something and then the phone rings or something else happens. It gets harder to do. In a room where you're working with a lot of other people in a team, you tend to multitask. You tend to do other things. And there will be people in this room right now who are doing something else right now, particularly those of you with your screens off. You will be trying to do two things at once. And yeah, look, that's fine. I don't mind, because it's also very human and we're all trying to do it. But those of you who are giving me 100% of your attention are likely to be able to retain more of this and do more with it. So in groups, we tend to multitask and nobody's good at it. So either the group ends up not listening or not being clear on what the outcome is. And the last of these is we tend to dumb things down. People are obsessively concerned with what other people think of them, so we don't want to look stupid. I hate looking stupid. So that means that either we don't share our ideas because we're concerned we haven't thought them all the way through yet, even though discussing them with other people would help us refine them. Or if we have some other information or we think somebody else might be wrong, we're reluctant to disagree with somebody, because if it turns out we're wrong, that will be very embarrassing. So there are things that we can do about each of these things. So groupthink in particular is really something that you just have to be aware of. And one of the things that I would be suggesting that you do in groups is actually make it somebody's job to be the devil's advocate, to argue with everything, to question every idea, rotate around. So, there might be somebody in the group who that's the way they're going to behave all the time, but actually it's good for them to switch it up too. Make it someone's job to be the devil's advocate. The other thing, and we're going to practice some of this in a minute, is prepare your ideas silently and separately and share them later. Brainstorming is something that is always talked about in the context of design thinking, and particularly in coming up with new ideas, but noisy, boss in the room brainstorming just does not work. So we're going to practice some brainstorming techniques very shortly for me to actually explain this idea of doing that silently. Also, it's important to create a safe space, to have a laugh with each other, to share your ideas, to create a space where it's okay for people to throw something crazy into the room that you will then be able to diverge in and talk about. Because otherwise, unless people have permission to share their ideas, there'll be just lots of nodding and no real agreement. Secondly, free riders. This is about setting clear expectations, and the exercise that we're going to do, and I'm going to encourage you to complete when your groups are assigned, is really about getting some clear expectations. I also think it's a really good idea for you to create a group charter, like a contract, a set of rules for how your group is going to work. Team superiority complex, you really need to be aware of that. You need to compare yourselves with other teams, not just with each other. You've got to remind each other of the mission and its objectives. And you need to seek to raise the bar rather than just meet in the middle. Multitasking. Tyranny of the average is the next one, sorry. Do you know what I actually, because I was looking at the wrong slide, I've actually given you feedback on tyranny of the average a second ago. This is me being wrong. In relation to team superiority complex, you need to agree a mission. You need to structure the meetings and recap at the end. You need to actually just not assume because it's your team, it's the best team, and that you have those disciplines in place. Tyranny of the average is really about the way you get around that is to compare your team as a whole to other teams as opposed to just thinking about how you fit in the middle. Cognitive interrupters is again about safe spaces. It's okay to be funny. It's okay to try ideas. It's okay not to be politically correct all the time, but you do need to be careful not to be offensive and to pull everybody in together. At the end of the day, Miss Manners is not a good brainstormer. Sometimes you do have to, really just let go of your inhibitions and say what you need to say. At the same time, you're working with another group of students. You need to be kind to each other, and that's about creating a safe space. And the last one about dumbing down. You've got, and this is easier to say and harder to do. You've got to try not to worry about other people, what they think of your ideas, or don't play it safe, in other words. You've got to pay attention to the problem and be prepared to take risks. One of the articles I've given you to have a look at is about preempting team conflict. And that's also about having conversations and thinking about the way people look, act, speak, think, and feel. Now, you can never know what anybody else thinks unless they tell you, and even then they might not tell you the truth, and they certainly won't tell you everything that they're thinking, and you can certainly never know what they feel, but you can get a sense of that through empathy and by using some of the tools that we're speaking about. But you can choose how you present yourself, whether you, and by look here I mean whether you show up on time, whether you come ready to work. In meetings, this can also be about how you dress and how you present yourself, how you behave and how you speak. Those things you can control about yourself and you can observe for others. So it does make sense to spend some time reflecting on how you intend to come across and if there are gaps between that and how you actually come across. You can also work to establish team norms around things like punctuality and taking turns to speak and making sure that everybody has a say. Communications styles have lots of different dimensions. When you do leadership and people in organisations courses like that, you will spend a lot more time getting some understanding of different communication styles. But for now, be aware that just because you wouldn't speak like that or you wouldn't behave like that doesn't mean that it's inappropriate for somebody else to do so. Also, we have a mainly Vietnamese group from what I can see, but we do have some people from other cultures, including myself. So actually thinking about how the cultural divide works and how people will work together is really important, what those cultural differences are. Thinking and feeling, I've really said enough at the beginning, and I want us to be doing some work, not just you listening to me. So you'll have these slides when we finish. You can have a think about these, but really this is all grounding for getting your groups up and working together. And yes, the slide that's in front of me is basically the summary from the Harvard Business Review article, which reminds me. Now, someone was in touch with me last night that at least one of the links to one of the readings was broken. That happens from time to time when I link things in the library because the publishers change, and I don't always pick them up in advance. If you ever have that problem, please send me the URL of the page and I will try and fix it as soon as I can. But I do not prescribe any reading in this course that isn't available online in the library. So the other thing you can do, the quickest thing you can do, is to go into the library and search for the article. They should be properly cited in Canvas, so you will have enough information to be able to find that, that article just using the search tools. One of the great resources is the Harvard Business Review. I love Harvard Business Review. A colleague of mine calls it the ladies' magazine, Woman's Weekly, she calls it, of business. I think that's a little bit harsh, but it has some really interesting articles. They're often quite controversial and they're very, very current, but they're also incredibly brief and well written. And almost all of them will start with this little summary. So you know before you've read 20 pages whether you're reading the right thing. And most of them are only 2 or 3 pages long anyway. They'll have the idea in brief section. So it sets out what problem they're trying to solve, what they do in practice, what the view is, what summarizes in some way what the view is. So they're worth looking at. And RMIT has every single Harvard Business Review article ever available for you. And basically, if you go into the library and follow those ProQuest links, you will find them.